The ship of Theseus paradox. You're standing on the deck of an ancient ship, the wood beneath your feet creaking softly with the rhythm of the waves. It's the ship of Theseus, a symbol of history and identity. But here's the twist. Every plank, every mast, every rope, over time, each has been replaced. Not a single original piece remains, and yet it's still called the ship of Theseus. But is it really the same ship? Now let's pull this thought experiment into something even more personal. Look at yourself. You're not the same person you were a year ago or even a moment ago. The cells in your body regenerate constantly. Old ones die. New ones take their place. Your skin is different. Your bones are different. Even your memories are reshaped over time, edited like drafts of a story you're endlessly rewriting. So here's the haunting question. If you replace every single part of yourself, piece by piece, are you still you? At first, it feels easy to say, of course I am. After all, you remember your childhood, your triumphs, your heartbreaks. You know the life you've lived, right? But think deeper. Your childhood memories aren't perfect snapshots. They're murky recollections colored by time and emotion. The person who laughed, cried, and dreamed back then was shaped by a mind and body entirely different from what you have now. If nothing about you has stayed exactly the same, then who are you? The ship of Theseus paradox doesn't just challenge our understanding of objects like ships, it strikes at the core of identity itself. It's a problem philosophers have wrestled with for centuries. Let's consider two angles. First, the idea that identity comes from continuity. The ship remains the ship of Theseus because it retains its function and its story. Similarly, you might argue that you're the same person because your life flows in an unbroken stream. Sure, parts of you have changed, but there's a thread, your consciousness, your sense of self, that ties it all together. It's like a river. The water is never the same, but the river still flows, holding its shape and identity through time. But then there's the other angle, the one that whispers doubt into the cracks of your certainty. If nothing physical about the ship or you remains unchanged, is there really a self that persists? What if you're not a river, but a collection of moments stitched together, a mosaic that's constantly being rearranged? The ship may sail the same seas, but if every plank is new, what exactly is it that stays the same? Now let's add another twist to the paradox. Imagine taking all the discarded pieces of the ship of Theseus and using them to build a second ship. That ship, made of all the original parts, would feel like a truer, more authentic version of the original, wouldn't it? But now we have two ships, both claiming to be the same one, which is the real ship of Theseus. Similarly, if you could gather every memory, every cell, every moment of your past self and rebuild it, would that be the real you? Or is it the version of you standing here now, reading this, that holds the claim? The paradox forces us to confront something unsettling. Identity is slippery. We like to think of ourselves as solid, unchanging beings, but in truth, we're fluid. We're stories told in motion, constantly rewriting, editing, and evolving. This isn't just philosophical speculation, it's biological reality. The cells in your stomach lining are brand new every few days. Your skeleton replaces itself roughly every 10 years. Your brain changes too, as neural connections strengthen, weaken, or disappear. So, if identity isn't fixed, what can you hold on to? Maybe the answer lies not in clinging to permanence, but in embracing change. After all, isn't growth what makes life beautiful? The ship of Theseus, whether it's a pile of planks or a fully functioning vessel, is defined by its journey, its purpose, its story. And so are you. The paradox doesn't have a neat solution because it's not meant to. It's a mirror, reflecting the complexity of being human. You are not the same person you were yesterday, and you won't be the same person tomorrow. But maybe that's the point. Maybe identity isn't about what stays the same, but about the courage to sail forward, no matter how many times your ship is rebuilt. The paradox of the liar. This statement is false. Just 5 words, but they form a sentence that flips logic on its head, leaving you stranded in an endless loop. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. You've walked right into a trap, a mind-bending puzzle that refuses to play by the rules of language and reason. Sir, at first glance, it seems harmless, even trivial. It's just a sentence, after all. But as you turn it over in your mind, you start to feel the weight of its implications. Logic, the foundation of how you make sense of the world, begins to feel less like a solid rock and more like a thin sheet of ice. The harder you press, the more it cracks. The liar paradox is more than a clever word game. It's a challenge to the very structure of how we think. You rely on language to convey truth, to define reality, but this simple statement reveals a fatal flaw. Language can loop back on itself, creating contradictions that logic can't untangle. How can something be true and false at the same time? And if you can't trust the rules of language, what can you trust? To understand the paradox, let's break it down. If this statement is false, is true, then the statement is accurate. It really is false. But wait, if it's false, then it can't be true. And if it's false, the statement's claim to be false must be untrue, which means it's true. Around and around you go, trapped in a cycle with no escape. You might think, this is just a quirky sentence. Why does it matter? But here's where it gets interesting. The liar paradox isn't just a linguistic curiosity, it's a mirror held up to the limits of human thought. It's a reminder that even the tools we use to define reality, words, logic, reason, are imperfect and can crumble under their own weight. This paradox has haunted philosophers for millennia. The ancient Greek thinker Eubulides first introduced it, and since then, great minds like Aristotle, Bertrand Russell, and Kurt Gödel have grappled with its implications. It's not just a riddle, it's a crack in the foundation of logical systems. Gödel's incompleteness theorems, for example, were partly inspired by this paradox, showing that any system complex enough to include basic arithmetic will contain statements that are true but unprovable. Think about that. The liar paradox isn't just a quirky sentence. It's a key to understanding the limits of what can be known. It whispers a deeply unsettling truth. There are questions that can't be answered, problems that logic alone can't solve. But the paradox doesn't stop at philosophy. It seeps into your everyday life, often without you realizing it. Have you ever doubted someone's sincerity when they say, "I'm not lying"? The liar paradox is right there, lurking in that statement. If they're telling the truth, then they're not lying. But if they're lying, then their claim not to be lying is false. It's a practical reminder that truth and trust aren't always as straightforward as they seem. And then there's the digital world, where the paradox takes on a new life. In programming, self-referential loops can crash systems, creating an endless cycle that freezes progress. Even in artificial intelligence, the liar paradox serves as a cautionary tale. How can a machine designed to process truth handle statements that defy resolution? So, what's the takeaway? If this paradox can't be solved, what can you learn from it? Maybe the answer isn't in solving the paradox, but in understanding what it reveals about you. It shows that your mind, brilliant as it is, has limits. It forces you to confront the fragility of the frameworks you use to navigate the world, and it teaches you humility, a recognition that not everything can be neatly boxed into categories of true or false, right or wrong. The liar paradox reminds you that reality isn't always logical, and that's okay. Life itself often defies the neat boundaries of reason. Embrace the messiness, accept the contradictions. After all, sometimes the most profound truths aren't found in certainty, but in the willingness to face the infinite loop and let it deepen your understanding of the mysteries that make us human. The paradox of the self. Every night you close your eyes and drift into the darkness of sleep. Hours pass, dreams blur the boundaries of reality, and then you wake up, refreshed, groggy, or somewhere in between. But have you ever stopped to wonder, is the you who opens your eyes in the morning the same you who closed them the night before? On the surface, the answer seems obvious. Of course, it's still you. You remember yesterday's thoughts, yesterday's plans, yesterday's version of yourself. But dig a little deeper, and cracks begin to appear in that certainty. Your body and brain have changed overnight. Cells have died and been replaced. Neural connections have shifted, and your dreams might have left faint imprints on your mind. If nothing about you stays entirely the same, then who or what are you? The paradox of the self asks a profound question about identity. Is it something continuous, an unbroken thread connecting every moment of your existence, or is it an illusion, a story you tell yourself to make sense of constant change? Think about it. Every part of you is in flux. Your thoughts evolve, your emotions ebb and flow, and your memories are less like snapshots and more like paintings altered by every brushstroke of time. Even your sense of I shifts depending on the moment. The person who laughs with friends feels different from the one who cries alone in the dark. If the self is so fluid, what anchors you to the idea that you're the same person from one day to the next? Some might argue that continuity of memory is the glue that holds your identity together. You remember what you did yesterday, last week, or even years ago, but memory is far from perfect. It's selective, often inaccurate, and constantly revised. The memory of a childhood vacation might feel vivid, but studies show that every time you recall it, you're reconstructing the event rather than replaying it. If your memories are shaky, can they truly define you? Others point to the continuity of your body. After all, it's the same physical vessel carrying you through time, right? But even that isn't entirely true. Your cells regenerate constantly. The skin you're in today wasn't the skin you had a year ago. Your brain, the supposed seat of the self, rewires itself throughout your life. By some estimates, every atom in your body is replaced over the course of a decade. If your physical self is in constant flux, what remains? This paradox isn't just a philosophical curiosity, it's a deeply personal question. When you reflect on who you are, you likely think of a core identity, a sense of self that feels stable despite the changes around you. But what if that sense is a construct, a useful fiction that helps you navigate a chaotic world? Buddhist philosophy has long grappled with this question, teaching the concept of anatta, or no self. It suggests that the self is an illusion, a bundle of ever-changing thoughts, feelings, and experiences with no fixed center. From this perspective, clinging to the idea of a permanent self is the root of much of your suffering. After all, if you're trying to protect something that doesn't truly exist, you're bound to feel fear, frustration, and disappointment. But here's the twist. Even if the self is an illusion, it's an incredibly useful one. It gives you a sense of purpose, a narrative to follow, a way to make sense of the world. Without it, you'd be adrift in a sea of disconnected moments. The paradox of the self isn't about dismissing your identity, it's about understanding its fluidity. So where does that leave you? Are you the same person who fell asleep last night? The answer depends on how you define you. If you see yourself as a fixed entity, the paradox exposes the fragility of that belief. But if you embrace the idea of change, that your identity is a process rather than a product, you might find freedom in the fluidity. You're not a static being frozen in time. You're a river, constantly flowing, reshaping the landscape as you go. Each moment adds to the story, but no single moment defines it. Perhaps the you who wakes up each morning isn't the same you who went to sleep, and maybe that's okay, because in the end, the paradox of the self isn't about finding a definitive answer. It's about learning to embrace the beautiful, ever-changing mystery of what it means to exist. The paradox of the forgotten dream. Picture this. You close your eyes and drift into a dream. In that dream, you live an entire lifetime. You grow, you laugh, you love. You face struggles, triumphs, and moments of breathtaking beauty. Decades pass in the blink of an eye, and then you wake up. The dream vanishes, leaving behind only the faintest, fleeting sense that something extraordinary has slipped through your fingers. If you can't remember it, if it leaves no trace in your waking mind, did that life exist? Now, take a deep breath, because this question goes deeper than dreams. Apply it to your waking life. Imagine reaching the end of your days. If death is the end of consciousness, does everything you've ever experienced vanish like a forgotten dream? Does the story of your existence cease to matter if there's no one left to remember it? The paradox of the forgotten dream forces you to confront the fragility of memory, identity, and meaning. You live as though your life is concrete, as though your moments will endure. But what if they're as fleeting as the echoes of a dream you'll never recall? At first, the answer seems obvious. Your waking life feels real, grounded. It leaves behind evidence, relationships you've built, actions you've taken, even the physical traces of your existence. But think of how many dreams have felt vivid, lifelike, undeniable in the moment, only to dissolve into nothingness upon waking. In those brief instants, the dream felt real too. What if the distinction between the two isn't as clear as you think? The paradox hinges on memory. Dreams, like moments of your waking life, exist as long as they're remembered. But when they fade, it's as though they never happened. What's unsettling is realizing how much of your waking life follows the same pattern. How many moments have you already forgotten? The sound of your first laugh, the way sunlight fell on your childhood bedroom, the feeling of a loved one's hand in yours. If a moment isn't remembered, does it still have meaning? And then there's the bigger question, the one that lingers at the edges of mortality. When your life ends, if consciousness truly ceases, Does your entire existence become a forgotten dream? Even the most vivid memories will vanish. The people who knew you will eventually fade away. The universe itself won't hold on to your story. This is where the paradox cuts deepest. It forces you to grapple with the idea that meaning might be transient, that the value of your life isn't tied to its permanence. What if, like a dream, its worth lies not in its longevity but in the experience itself? Some philosophies offer a way to reframe this unsettling thought. In Buddhism, the fleeting nature of existence, anicca, or impermanence, isn't something to fear, it's something to accept. Life, like a dream, is a transient phenomenon, but that doesn't diminish its beauty. In fact, it's the fleeting nature of a moment that makes it precious. The cherry blossom is breathtaking, not despite its fragility, but because of it. And consider this, even forgotten dreams leave subtle imprints. A dream you can't recall might still color your mood, influence your thoughts, or shape the way you approach the day. Similarly, your waking life, even if forgotten, ripples outward in ways you may never fully see. A kind word, a small act of love, a piece of art you create, they all have the power to touch lives, to continue beyond you. So, did the dream exist? Did that lifetime in your sleep mean anything, even if it vanished the moment you opened your eyes? The answer depends on what you believe gives life value. If meaning comes from permanence, then the dream, and perhaps life itself, is a paradoxical void. But if meaning is found in presence, in the act of living fully and authentically in each fleeting moment, then the dream and life are both profoundly real. The paradox of the forgotten. Dream isn't here to offer easy answers. It's here to remind you that life, like dreams, is both fragile and extraordinary. Whether you wake from it tomorrow or never wake at all, the value of your existence is not in how long it lingers, but in how deeply it is lived. Maybe, in the end, the forgotten dream and the forgotten life are one and the same, beautiful, fleeting, and meaningful in ways that transcend memory. The Buridan's ass paradox. Imagine a donkey standing perfectly still, caught between two identical piles of hay. Each is the same size, the same distance away, the same enticing smell wafting through the air. The donkey, unable to find a logical reason to choose one over the other, remains frozen in indecision. Time passes, the piles of hay remain untouched, and the donkey, unable to decide, starves. It's a grim little tale, isn't it? But now, let's turn the lens toward your own life. How often do you find yourself standing at a similar crossroads, paralyzed not by the lack of options, but by the sheer equality of them? You weigh the pros and cons, dissect every detail, and yet, instead of moving forward, you hesitate. You wait, and in that waiting, opportunities slip through your fingers like grains of sand. This is the heart of Buridan's ass paradox, a thought experiment that reveals the dark side of indecision. On the surface, it might seem absurd, a donkey starving because it can't choose, but it's a perfect metaphor for the human condition. The fear of making the wrong choice can sometimes feel so overwhelming that you'd rather make no choice at all, even if it costs you something vital. Think about the last time you faced a decision that left you frozen. Maybe it was choosing between two job offers, two cities to move to, or even two different flavors of ice cream. The stakes might vary, but the struggle is the same. Each option feels equally compelling or equally daunting, and so you linger in the in-between, telling yourself you'll decide tomorrow or the next day or the next. But here's the catch. Tomorrow doesn't always come. Life doesn't wait for you to make up your mind. While you deliberate, the world moves on. The opportunity you hesitated to seize might disappear entirely. And the longer you linger, the more you begin to feel like the donkey, paralyzed, unsure, and slowly starving for a decision. The paradox forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth about choice. Sometimes, the real danger isn't in choosing wrong, but in not choosing at all. Inaction has a cost, and it's often far greater than the consequences of making an imperfect decision. So, why do you hesitate? The answer lies in the psychology of choice. You want to make the right decision, the one that guarantees success or happiness. But life doesn't offer guarantees. Every choice involves risk, and no amount of analysis can eliminate uncertainty. The more you chase perfection in decision-making, the harder it becomes to act. And then there's the burden of regret, the fear that if you choose one path, you'll forever wonder about the road not taken. What if the other pile of hay would have been sweeter, more nourishing, more satisfying? This fear, ironically, often leads to a choice worse than either option: doing nothing. The paradox teaches a profound lesson. Sometimes you have to act without certainty. You have to choose, not because one option is perfect, but because movement is better than stagnation. Life is messy, and every choice carries a mix of gains and losses. But even the wrong choice teaches you something. It moves you forward, adds to your story, and opens the door to new possibilities. Philosophers have debated the implications of Buridan's ass for centuries, but the solution is surprisingly simple. When faced with two equally good options, pick one. Flip a coin if you have to. The act of choosing breaks the stalemate, freeing you from paralysis and allowing you to move forward. After all, life isn't about finding perfect answers. It's about creating meaning through action. The donkey didn't starve because the hay wasn't good enough. It starved because it forgot one essential truth. Any choice is better than no choice. So the next time you're caught between two options, remember the paradox. Don't let indecision rob you of opportunities. Don't stand still while the world moves forward. Choose a pile of hay. Take a step. Move, even if it feels uncertain. Because in the end, life rewards those who are willing to act, not those who wait forever for the perfect moment that never comes. The Sorites Paradox, the paradox of the heap. Picture a heap of sand sitting in front of you, a perfect little mountain of grains. Now imagine removing one grain. It's still a heap, right? You pluck another and another. The heap remains, but as you keep going, something strange begins to happen. Grain by grain, the pile shrinks until you're left with just one lone speck of sand. Is that a heap? This is the Sorites Paradox, the paradox of the heap. It asks a seemingly simple question. At what point does a heap stop being a heap? There's no clear answer, no exact moment when the transformation occurs. The boundaries blur, and the definition of heap dissolves into uncertainty. Now turn that question inward. Instead of a heap of sand, imagine your personality, your identity. Piece by piece, aspects of who you are can shift or fall away over time. A habit you once cherished disappears. A belief you held firmly evolves. A role you defined yourself by, student, friend, partner, fades into memory. If enough grains of your identity are removed, at what point do you stop being you? On the surface, it seems ridiculous. Of course, you're still you, but dig deeper, and the question becomes far more unsettling. Like the heap of sand, your identity isn't a fixed, solid thing. It's made up of countless grains, your experiences, memories, thoughts, and traits. Each contributes to the whole, but none alone defines it. Think about the person you were 10 years ago. How much of that person remains? Maybe you've changed careers, moved cities, or let go of old friendships. Maybe your values have shifted, your goals have evolved. Are you the same person? You might say yes, but what if 10 more years pass, and 10 more after that? As each grain falls away, at what point does the you of yesterday become unrecognizable to the you of today? The paradox doesn't just challenge your sense of identity, it questions how you define anything at all. Where do you draw the line? Is a single grain of sand a heap? 2 grains? 3? Similarly, is there a single trait or memory that makes you fundamentally you? Or is your identity, like the heap, a concept with no hard edges, no definitive boundaries? Philosophers have grappled with the Sorites paradox for centuries. It reveals the fragility of definitions and the slipperiness of language. Words like heap or self rely on fuzzy boundaries, assumptions that fall apart under close scrutiny. And yet, these fragile constructs shape how you see the world. In some ways, this paradox mirrors your experience of time. Change happens gradually, often imperceptibly. You don't notice the individual grains slipping away until one day you look back and realize the heap has transformed. It's both comforting and disorienting, a reminder that change is inevitable and that clinging to static definitions can blind you to the fluid nature of life. But here's where the paradox shifts from unsettling to profound. While the grains of your identity may shift, the process itself, the constant rebuilding, evolving, reshaping, is what makes you who you are. You're not a static pile of sand. You're the act of gathering, releasing, and reshaping those grains. Your identity isn't a thing. It's a movement, a story that's always unfolding. The Sorites paradox doesn't have a neat solution, and that's the point. It forces you to confront the gray areas of existence, the places where certainty fades into ambiguity. It challenges you to embrace the fluidity of life and to let go of the need for rigid definitions. So, when you think about the heap, or yourself, don't get stuck searching for the exact moment when it changes. Instead, focus on the beauty of the process. The grains of sand, like the moments of your life, come together and fall away, creating something dynamic, something alive. In the end, the paradox isn't about finding where the heap disappears or where you ends. It's about recognizing that identity, like a heap of sand, is a work in progress, and maybe the real magic lies not in the heap itself, but in the infinite possibilities of its transformation. The paradox of Theseus's identity. Imagine stepping into a room where a perfect replica of you is standing. Not just a look-alike, but an exact clone, down to every molecule, every scar, every childhood memory. It remembers your favorite song, your worst heartbreak, and the way you like your coffee. For all intents and purposes, it believes it's you. But here's the question: is it you? At first, the answer might seem clear. Of course not. You're standing here, and the clone is over there. But what if every part of the clone, its body, its mind, even its personality, matches you so perfectly that no one, not even you, can tell the difference? Where does your identity truly reside? This is the paradox of Theseus's identity, a twist on the classic ship of Theseus. But instead of replacing the parts of a ship, we're replacing the parts of you. If someone builds a second you, out of the exact same materials, with the exact same memories. Is the clone still just a copy, or is it something more? The paradox forces you to ask, what makes you you? Is it your physical body, the atoms and molecules that make up your cells? If so, then the clone is indistinguishable from you, because it shares the same structure down to the tiniest particle. But your body is constantly changing. The cells you had as a child have been replaced, your physical form evolving over time. If you can stay you through all those changes, then how can the clone be you when it hasn't shared that journey? Perhaps your identity lies in your memories. After all, your past shapes your sense of self. But memories are tricky. They're not fixed, static things. They change with time, colored by emotions, and shaped by how you retell your story. If the clone remembers everything you do, right down to the scent of rain on a childhood summer day, does it have just as much claim to being you as you do? Or maybe it's something deeper, a kind of essence, a soul that can't be cloned or replicated. But what is that essence? And how do you define it? Is it something tangible? Or is it just another word for the story you tell yourself about who you are? The paradox becomes even more unsettling when you think about the future. Imagine the clone stepping into your life, taking over your job, your relationships, your dreams. To everyone else, it is you, and if it experiences new moments and memories, does it eventually become more you than you are? Meanwhile, do you slowly become something else, diverging as your lives take different paths? The paradox of Theseus's identity isn't just a question about cloning. It's a question about the nature of existence itself. What does it mean to be a person? Are you a sum of your parts, or are you something more? And if your parts can be perfectly replicated, where does that leave the concept of individuality? Some philosophers argue that identity is more about continuity than exact replication. The you that exists today is connected to the you of yesterday by an unbroken chain of experiences, thoughts, and emotions. The clone, while identical, doesn't share that continuity. It hasn't lived your life, made your mistakes, or learned your lessons. In that sense, it's not you. But others see identity as more fluid, a construct rather than a constant. If the clone can think, feel, and remember exactly as you do, then maybe it is you, or at least one version of you. After all, isn't identity always a kind of story, one that changes as you grow? This paradox challenges the boundaries of individuality. It asks you to question the things you take for granted about yourself, your body, your mind, your memories, and it forces you to confront an unsettling possibility that you might not be as singular or unique as you've always believed. So, if you were to meet your clone, what would you see? A stranger? A twin? A reflection? Or would you see something even deeper? A reminder that identity, like life itself, is not fixed or finite, but endlessly complex. A paradox you can never fully unravel. The paradox of time and now. Close your eyes for a moment and think about now. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, but this exact moment. Feel the rhythm of your breath, the sound of these words echoing in your mind. This is the present, the only slice of time you truly experience. But the moment you try to grasp it, it slips away, replaced by another now. So here's the question. Does the present moment even exist? Or is it an illusion, a fleeting point caught between the vast stretches of past and future? This is the paradox of time and now, and it challenges everything you think you know about how time flows. You live as though the present is all there is, yet it feels impossible to pin down. It's always moving, always shifting, disappearing the instant you try to hold on to it. Think about it. The past is gone. You can't reach back and touch it, no matter how vivid your memories feel. The future hasn't arrived, and you have no way of knowing if it ever will. All you have is this moment. But what is the present, exactly? If it's the boundary between past and future, then it must be infinitesimally small. So small that it's essentially nothing. This paradox forces you to question the nature of time itself. Is the present real, or is it just an illusion created by your mind to make sense of a reality that's constantly in motion? One way to approach the paradox is to think of time as a river. The present is like a single point on the water's surface, the place where the current flows beneath your fingertips. But if the river is always moving, is there ever a true point? Or is the present just the illusion of stillness in a stream that never stops? Then there's the question of how you perceive time. Your brain takes milliseconds to process sensory input, which means you're always experiencing reality as it was a tiny moment ago. Even the present isn't truly now. It's a lagging echo of what just happened. Some philosophers argue that time is an illusion altogether, that past, present, and future are all part of a single, unchanging reality. From this perspective, the present isn't a point in time. It's your perception of a larger whole. You live in the now because your consciousness can't process the vastness of eternity all at once. But here's where it gets personal. If the present doesn't exist, or if it's so fleeting that it barely counts as real, then what does that say about your life? Every moment you've experienced, every memory, every plan, every dream, they all hinge on the idea that time flows forward and that the present is real. Without the present, how do you make sense of who you are? The paradox doesn't stop at philosophy. It seeps into your daily life. How often do you dwell on the past, replaying moments in your mind like a song stuck on repeat? How often do you project yourself into the future, worrying about what's to come or imagining what could be? And yet, all of that happens in the now. Even when you're lost in thought, the only place you ever truly live is this fleeting, indefinable moment. So, what can you do with this paradox? If the present is both everything and nothing, how do you find meaning in it? The answer might lie in embracing the contradiction. The present doesn't need to be something you hold on to. It's something you experience. It's the breath you take, the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the fleeting feeling of connection when you smile at someone. The paradox of time and now isn't meant to be solved. It's meant to be felt. It's a reminder that life is as transient as the present itself. You can't cling to it, but you can live in it, fully and completely, without needing it to be anything more than what it is, a fleeting point of experience, rich with possibility. So, let the past rest. Let the future wait. Be here in the paradox of now, and let it remind you that existence isn't about holding on to time. It's about moving with it, moment by moment, into the infinite unknown. The paradox of free will versus determinism. Think about the last choice you made. Maybe it was as small as deciding what to eat for breakfast or as significant as choosing your career path. It felt like your choice, didn't it? A decision made freely, guided by your thoughts, desires, and values. But what if it wasn't? What if every decision you've ever made, no matter how personal, was just the inevitable result of everything that came before, your upbringing, your biology, the motion of the universe itself? This is the paradox of free will versus determinism, a tension that strikes at the very heart of what it means to be human. You live as though you're free to shape your life, yet the universe seems to operate on a strict chain of cause and effect. If every action is the result of a prior cause, then where does your freedom fit in? The idea of determinism suggests that everything that happens, including your thoughts and choices, is the inevitable consequence of preceding events. Like dominoes falling in a perfect line, every action is caused by another, stretching back to the beginning of time. The family you were born into, the culture that shaped you, the neurons firing in your brain, all of it combines to create the conditions for your decisions. If that's true, can you ever truly act freely? Yet, you feel free. When you stand in front of two paths, left or right, you feel the weight of the decision, the sense that you could choose either. You deliberate, weigh your options, and make a choice. But what if that deliberation was itself predetermined? What if the way you think, the values you hold, and the logic you use were all shaped by forces beyond your control? This paradox forces you to question your deepest assumptions about yourself. If free will is an illusion, what does that say about responsibility? If your actions are predetermined, can you be blamed for mistakes or praised for achievements? Is the idea of moral accountability just a convenient story society tells itself? Some philosophers, like those in the hard determinist camp, argue that free will doesn't exist. They see human behavior as just another part of the natural world, governed by the same laws of physics that guide the stars. To them, your sense of autonomy is no more real than the illusion of a stationary earth beneath your feet. Others take a softer approach, embracing what's called compatibilism. They argue that free will and determinism aren't mutually exclusive. Even if your choices are influenced by prior causes, you're still free as long as you act according to your desires and intentions. In this view, freedom isn't about escaping causality. It's about being able to act without external coercion. But the paradox doesn't stop at philosophy. It plays out in your everyday life. Think about how you interpret your actions. When you succeed, you feel pride, believing your hard work and effort paid off. When you stumble, you blame yourself, convinced you could have done better. But if determinism is true, then your successes and failures were written into the fabric of reality long before you were even born. And yet, abandoning the idea of free will feels impossible. It's woven into the way you experience the world, the way you interact with others. You feel like an agent, a being capable of shaping your life and making choices that matter. So, where does that leave you? Maybe the paradox isn't meant to be resolved, but to deepen your understanding of what it means to be human. Determinism might limit your choices, but it doesn't strip them of meaning. Every decision you make is part of a complex web of causes and effects, but it's also part of your unique story. The fact that your choices are shaped by the world doesn't make them any less yours. The paradox of free will versus determinism invites you to live in the tension between control and surrender. Yes, your choices are influenced by countless forces you can't see, but that doesn't mean your life is meaningless. You still get to live it, to navigate its complexities, to make decisions that shape your experience. Perhaps the real freedom lies not in escaping causality, but in embracing it, to act knowing that your choices matter, even if they were always going to happen, to live fully in the moment, even if that moment was inevitable. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of free will that matters most. Zeno's Paradox of Motion. Imagine standing at the edge of a road, ready to take a step forward. You can see your destination, a place just a few feet away, but before you can get there, you need to cover half the distance. Simple enough, right? But before you reach halfway, you must cover half of that half, and then half of that, and so on, endlessly dividing the space in front of you into smaller and smaller pieces. Suddenly, a question looms. If there are infinite steps to take, how do you ever arrive at your destination? This is Zeno's Paradox of Motion, a puzzle that seems to defy common sense. You move through the world every day, walking to the store, driving to work, reaching out to pick up your coffee cup. Motion feels natural, obvious, and yet Zeno's reasoning suggests it's impossible. At first glance, it sounds absurd. Of course, you can reach your destination. You do it all the time. But the paradox reveals something unsettling about how we think about infinity and time. If every step, no matter how small, must be completed before the next, then aren't you trapped in an endless process of getting closer but never quite arriving? The paradox forces you to confront the nature of division and infinity. You can always break something into smaller parts, divide a line, a second, a step, forever. But how do you make sense of an infinite number of steps when motion itself feels so continuous and seamless? Let's take a closer look. If you're traveling to a point 1 meter away, you first cover half the distance, 0.5 meters, then half of what remains, 0.25 meters, then 0.125, and so on. Each step gets smaller, and the time it takes to cover each one shrinks. Mathematically, the sum of all these steps adds up to exactly 1 meter. But in Zeno's paradox, the infinite nature of the steps creates the illusion that you're stuck in a never-ending process. And here's where the paradox gets personal. Think about the goals you're trying to reach in your own life. How often do you feel like you're stuck in an infinite loop of almost there? You set a goal, make progress, and yet the finish line always seems to move further away. Every step forward uncovers more steps to take, more tasks to complete, more challenges to overcome. Zeno's paradox isn't just a problem of motion, it's a metaphor for how we experience progress. Life often feels like an endless series of halfway points, and the fear of never arriving can paralyze you. Why bother starting if you'll never truly finish? But here's the twist. While the paradox may seem insurmountable, it also holds a profound truth. Even though the journey is infinite in theory, it's finite in reality. The mathematical solution shows that the infinite series of steps does converge. The reason you can reach your destination is that the time and distance required for each successive step become so small that they effectively vanish. The infinite doesn't stop you. It simply collapses into a seamless whole. This realization offers a powerful lesson. In life, you don't have to see the end of the road to take the next step. The infinite complexity of your journey doesn't make it impossible. It's simply a reminder that progress is made in increments. Each moment, each effort, no matter how small, carries you closer to your goal. Zeno's paradox also challenges you to rethink how you perceive time and motion. Movement isn't about completing an infinite sequence of tasks. It's about being in motion, flowing from one moment to the next. The act of moving is what bridges the gap between here and there, not the illusion of discrete steps. So, the next time you feel overwhelmed by the distance ahead, remember this paradox. You don't have to conquer infinity in a single leap. All you need is to take the next step, trusting that the pieces will come together. The paradox of motion isn't here to paralyze you. It's here to remind you that life is made of infinitely small moments, each one leading to the next, and in that flow, you'll find your destination, not by conquering infinity, but by moving through it. The Omnipotence Paradox. Picture an all-powerful being, a force so limitless that it can shape worlds, bend reality, and do anything imaginable. Now ask yourself this: could such a being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? At first, the question might seem harmless, almost playful, but as you think deeper, you'll feel the edges of logic begin to crumble. If the being cannot create the rock, then its power isn't truly limitless. But if it can create the rock and then fails to lift it, its power is still limited. Either way, omnipotence falters. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, a thought experiment that has stumped philosophers, theologians, and thinkers for centuries. It challenges not just the concept of omnipotence, but the very nature of logic and the limits of human understanding. The paradox reveals an inherent contradiction in the idea of being all-powerful. Omnipotence, by definition, implies the ability to do anything. But if anything includes creating logical impossibilities, does that render omnipotence incoherent? It's a circular trap. If the being can create the unliftable rock, it limits itself. If it can't, it's already limited. Either way, omnipotence appears to self-destruct. Let's break it down. The problem lies in how we define omnipotence. If it means having the ability to do literally anything, then creating a rock so heavy it can't be lifted must fall under its scope. But by doing so, the being contradicts its own power, creating a scenario where it is no longer omnipotent. On the other hand, if omnipotence means the ability to do anything that's logically possible, then the paradox dissolves, but at the cost of admitting that even omnipotence is constrained by logic. This raises profound questions. Is logic itself a higher power, an unbreakable framework that even an all-powerful being must obey? And if so, does that diminish the idea of omnipotence? Can power still be called limitless if it can't override the laws of reason? The paradox also speaks to the limits of human understanding. We think in terms of cause and effect, of rules and boundaries. The concept of omnipotence forces us to confront ideas that lie beyond those boundaries, stretching the limits of our imagination and reason. Maybe the paradox isn't about disproving omnipotence, but about showing the cracks in our own capacity to define it. Now, let's bring it closer to home. The Omnipotence Paradox isn't just a theological puzzle. It's a reflection of the struggles you face in your own life. How often do you find yourself trapped in impossible expectations, trying to balance conflicting demands? You want to be strong, but vulnerable, successful, but humble, independent, but deeply connected. Like the being in the paradox, you're caught between two opposing ideals, forced to confront the limits of what you can do. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. Omnipotence isn't about perfection. It's about navigating the tension between what's possible and what's ideal. The paradox reminds you that even the idea of being limitless comes with its own contradictions. So, can an all-powerful being create a rock it can't lift? Maybe the answer doesn't matter. The question itself forces you to grapple with the complexity of power, choice, and limitation. It challenges you to think beyond simple definitions and embrace the messy, contradictory nature of existence. In the end, the omnipotence paradox doesn't destroy the concept of omnipotence. It expands it. It shows that true power isn't about doing the impossible for its own sake. It's about understanding the balance between what can be done and what should be done, between logic and the infinite unknown. Perhaps omnipotence isn't about lifting rocks or defying reason. Perhaps it's about something far greater, the wisdom to move within the paradox itself. The paradox of the infinite library. Picture an infinite library stretching endlessly in every direction. Its shelves are packed with books of every size and color, each one filled with words that spill across the pages like rivers of thought. This library contains every possible book, every combination of letters and punctuation that could ever exist. Somewhere in its infinite aisles lies every piece of wisdom ever written, every lost story, every answer to every question. But it also contains every lie, every contradiction, every jumble of meaningless text. Now, ask yourself, in a place where all possible knowledge exists, does any of it truly matter? This is the paradox of the infinite library, inspired by Jorge Luis Borges' story, The Library of Babel. It forces you to confront a profound contradiction. If a library contains everything, how do you distinguish wisdom from noise? How do you find meaning in an ocean of infinite possibilities? At first, the idea feels exhilarating. Imagine having access to every truth that has ever been or could ever be. Every scientific breakthrough, every masterpiece of literature, every solution to humanity's deepest problems. Somewhere in this library is the cure for cancer, the formula for world peace, the definitive explanation of existence itself. But the infinite library doesn't just contain truth, it contains everything. For every masterpiece, there are endless volumes of gibberish, random sequences of letters that mean nothing. For every profound insight, there are countless contradictory claims. In this overwhelming abundance, the treasures are buried in an endless sea of irrelevance. And that's where the paradox lies. The more possibilities there are, the harder it becomes to find what's meaningful. In a finite library, every book has value because it exists within limits. But in an infinite library, the sheer scale renders most of it indistinguishable from chaos. If you had infinite options, how would you even begin to search? This paradox doesn't just exist in fiction. It reflects the world you live in. Think about the age of information, where nearly every piece of knowledge ever recorded is just a click away. The internet, in many ways, is its own infinite library. Yet instead of clarity, you often find yourself lost in a maze of conflicting opinions, shallow distractions, and endless noise. The paradox of infinite information is that it can feel like too much to handle, leaving you more confused than enlightened. The infinite library also forces you to question the nature of value. Is knowledge valuable because it's rare? If everyone had instant access to every possible answer, would knowledge lose its significance? Imagine finding a book in the library that explains the meaning of life. In a finite world, that book would be a treasure, But in an infinite library, it's just one among countless copies buried under an avalanche of nonsense. So, how do you navigate the infinite? One answer lies in embracing limits. Just as the infinite library contains all possible books, your mind is finite. You can't read every page, nor would you want to. Instead, meaning emerges from choice, deciding what to focus on, what to value, and what to leave behind. The paradox challenges you to reflect on how you approach knowledge in your own life. When faced with an overwhelming amount of information, what guides your search? What helps you filter noise from meaning? The infinite library, like the world around you, demands a kind of discipline, a willingness to prioritize depth over breadth, substance over novelty. And maybe that's the true lesson of the paradox. It's not the abundance of knowledge that gives it value, but your ability to seek, question, and discern. The infinite library is a mirror, reflecting both the chaos of existence and the human need to create order within it. So, would the infinite library contain wisdom or chaos? The answer is both. But in its endless shelves, the real treasure isn't a single book or a definitive truth. It's the process of searching, the act of choosing what matters to you. In the infinite expanse, meaning isn't something you find. It's something you create. The paradox of the prisoner's dilemma. Imagine you've been arrested along with a partner in crime. You're separated and offered a deal. If you betray your partner while they stay silent, you'll walk free and they'll serve a harsh sentence. But if you both betray each other, you'll both face a moderate punishment. And if you both stay silent, you'll only get a light slap on the wrist. The problem is, you don't know what your partner will do. What do you choose? Do you trust them and cooperate, risking betrayal? Or do you betray them first, ensuring your own safety, but dooming them in the process? This is the prisoner's dilemma, a paradox that reveals the tension between self-interest and collective well-being. On paper, cooperation seems like the best choice. If both of you stay silent, you both benefit. But when trust is uncertain, selfishness becomes the safer option. After all, betrayal guarantees a better outcome for you, regardless of what the other person does. And that's where the paradox lies. The rational choice, betrayal, leads to a worse outcome for both parties than cooperation would. Two people acting in their own self-interest end up hurting each other more than if they trusted one another. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a mirror reflecting the dilemmas you face in real life. From business negotiations to relationships, from climate change to political decisions, the prisoner's dilemma plays out over and over again. Why recycle if others won't? Why lower your prices if your competitors won't? Why open your heart when someone might hurt you? The fear of betrayal often leads people to choose selfishness, even when cooperation would clearly make everyone better off. But why does this happen? The answer lies in the psychology of trust and fear. Trust is fragile. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to take a risk without guarantees. Fear, on the other hand, is immediate and protective. It whispers that others might betray you, so you should strike first. In the prisoner's dilemma, this fear dominates, pushing people to prioritize short-term security over long-term gain. The paradox also exposes the complexity of human behavior. While it assumes rationality, that each person will act in their self-interest, real life isn't always so logical. People do cooperate, even when betrayal might seem safer. Why? Because trust, loyalty, and relationships often outweigh cold calculations. In some cases, cooperation isn't just a strategy, it's a reflection of your values and your desire to build something greater than yourself. But here's the twist. When the prisoner's dilemma is repeated over time, cooperation becomes more appealing. If you and your partner know you'll face this choice again and again, trust begins to grow. Betrayal might win in the short term, but cooperation builds stability and mutual benefit in the long run. This is the foundation of social contracts, relationships, and communities, a recognition that we're better together than we are alone. Yet the paradox remains. In a single, isolated instance, betrayal often feels like the rational choice. It's why people hoard resources during crises, why businesses undercut each other in a race to the bottom, and why nations struggle to unite against global challenges. The fear of being the one left vulnerable keeps people locked in a cycle of selfishness, even when cooperation would create a better world. So, how do you break the paradox? It starts with trust, but not blind trust. It's about fostering environments where cooperation feels safe, where the fear of betrayal is replaced by the promise of mutual benefit. In relationships, this means open communication and shared goals. In larger systems, it means building structures that reward collaboration and discourage exploitation. The prisoner's dilemma isn't just a game. It's a reflection of the choices you make every day. It asks you to weigh the risks of vulnerability against the rewards of connection. It challenges you to consider not just what benefits you now, but what creates a better outcome for everyone in the future. In the end, the paradox of the prisoner's dilemma isn't about the inevitability of betrayal. It's about the power of trust, the courage to cooperate, and the potential to rise above fear. Yes, betrayal is tempting, and yes, trust is risky. But the greatest rewards come not from acting alone, but from building something together, something that benefits not just you, but all of us. The paradox of the silent scream. Picture a vast forest, silent and still. A massive tree, ancient and proud, suddenly cracks under its own weight. It topples to the ground, branches snapping, earth trembling, but no one is there to witness it. No ears to catch the roar, no eyes to see the fall. And so, the question echoes. Did it make a sound? This is the paradox of the silent scream, a puzzle that forces you to confront the relationship between reality and perception. If an event occurs but isn't experienced, can it truly be said to exist? At first, the answer seems straightforward. Of course, the tree made a sound. Sound is a physical phenomenon, a vibration traveling through the air. Whether or not someone hears it, the air molecules still move. The vibrations still ripple outward. The forest doesn't need an audience to perform its symphony. But then you dig deeper, and the certainty begins to waver. Sound, as you experience it, isn't just vibrations in the air. It's what your brain creates when your ears capture those vibrations. Without an observer, without perception, there is no sound as you understand it. The tree falls, the air moves, but does it truly scream if no one hears it? This paradox doesn't just ask about trees and forests. It asks about the nature of reality itself. How much of the world exists independently, and how much of it depends on your perception? Consider your own life. If something happens to you, a triumph, a heartbreak, a fleeting moment of beauty, but no one else knows about it, does it matter? You might feel that your experiences are real because you perceive them. But what if the reverse is also true? What if things only exist because they're experienced? Philosophers have wrestled with this question for centuries. Some, like George Berkeley, argued that reality is perception, that objects only exist when they are observed. To Berkeley, the tree doesn't make a sound unless someone hears it, because the sound only exists as part of the experience. Others argue for an objective reality, independent of perception. The tree falls, the vibrations happen, and sound exists whether or not there's an ear to catch it. The universe, they claim, doesn't care whether anyone is watching. It moves forward regardless. But here's where the paradox gets personal. In your own life, how much of what you do feels meaningful only because it's witnessed? Think about the moments you post on social media, the stories you share, the times you seek validation for your achievements. Do they matter less if no one knows about them? Do they matter more when they're seen? The paradox of the silent scream isn't just about sound. It's about existence, validation, and meaning. It challenges you to ask, do you live for the experience itself or for the awareness that others perceive it? And yet, there's a freedom in this paradox. If reality doesn't depend on perception, then your experiences matter simply because they happen. The tree falls whether or not anyone hears it, just as your moments of joy and pain are real, even if they go unshared. On the other hand, if perception creates reality, then you hold incredible power, the power to shape your world through the act of noticing, of witnessing, of being present. So, did the tree make a sound? Maybe the answer doesn't matter as much as the question itself. The paradox invites you to reflect on the role of perception in your life, not just what you see, but how you see it. It reminds you that existence isn't just about being observed. It's about the richness of experience, whether shared or silent. The forest doesn't need an audience to exist, but the act of listening, truly listening, can transform the way you understand the world. And perhaps that's the real lesson of the silent scream. Not whether the sound was heard, but whether you're ready to hear the moments of life happening all around you, even when no one else is watching. The paradox of perception. Close your eyes for a moment and think of the color red. Maybe it's the fiery crimson of a sunset, the soft glow of an apple, or the deep intensity of a rose. Now open your eyes and ask yourself, when someone else sees red, do they experience the same thing you do? Are they seeing your red, or is their perception of red entirely different? Something you'll never truly know. This is the paradox of perception, a question that shakes the very foundations of how you understand reality. It challenges the assumption that your experiences are universal, forcing you to consider that the world might look, sound, and feel completely different to someone else. On the surface, perception seems straightforward. You look at an object, light bounces off it, your eyes capture the signal, and your brain translates it into color. Everyone learns to call that signal red, so it feels like a shared experience. But here's the problem. Perception doesn't just happen in your eyes, it happens in your mind. And minds are deeply personal, shaped by biology, culture, and memory. What if someone's red is your blue? What if their entire sensory world is subtly or wildly different from yours? You'll never know, because there's no way to step outside your own mind and experience theirs. This paradox reveals the isolation at the heart of perception. You live as though the world you see, hear, and feel is the same world everyone else experiences. But in truth, reality might be far more fragmented, with each person existing in their own private version of it. Now, think beyond color. The paradox extends to every aspect of your experience. How do you know that what feels like joy to you feels the same to someone else? When you describe pain, can they ever truly understand it? Or are they imagining something completely different? Even words, our best attempt to bridge the gap between minds, are colored by personal perception. This isn't just a philosophical problem, it's deeply human. The paradox of perception is why misunderstandings happen, why empathy can feel like such a leap, and why true connection can seem so elusive. You assume you're talking about the same reality, but what if your versions of that reality don't perfectly align? At its core, the paradox forces you to ask, is reality universal, or is it something you create in your mind? If perception shapes your experience of the world, then reality itself becomes deeply personal, a construct built from your senses and interpreted through the lens of your unique mind. But there's another side to this paradox, one that's oddly comforting. If everyone experiences reality differently, then diversity of perception becomes a strength, not a limitation. No two people see the world in the same way, which means each perspective adds something new, something richer, to the collective understanding of reality. And yet, the paradox also leaves you with a sense of mystery. If you can never fully know someone else's experience, does that mean you can never truly know them? Or does it mean that the act of trying, of listening, empathizing, and imagining is what brings you closer? So, when you see red, is it the same red as everyone else's? You'll never know for sure, but maybe that's the point. The paradox of perception doesn't need to be solved. It's a reminder of the beauty and complexity of human experience. It invites you to embrace the mystery, to appreciate the fact that everyone you meet is living in a world slightly or profoundly different from your own. In the end, perception is both a barrier and a bridge. It separates you from others, locking you in your own private reality, but it also gives you the tools to connect. Through art, conversation, and shared moments, you can catch glimpses of someone else's world, even if you can never fully inhabit it. The world you see is your own, shaped by your eyes, your mind, your life. But in the act of wondering about someone else's someone else's reality, you step closer to understanding what it means to be human. And perhaps in that wonder lies the most universal experience of all. The paradox of the unreliable narrator, brain in a vat. Imagine waking up in a stark, featureless room. You're hooked up to wires, your body floating in a vat of liquid, and a machine hums nearby, sending electrical signals to your brain. You realize, with a cold, sinking clarity, that everything you've ever experienced, every face you've loved, every place you've been, every joy and sorrow, has been nothing more than a simulation, an illusion fed directly into your mind. Now ask yourself, how do you know this isn't your reality right now? This is the paradox of the unreliable narrator, also known as the brain in a vat thought experiment. It challenges you to confront the unsettling possibility that your entire life might be a fabrication. If all your perceptions, memories, and thoughts can be simulated or manipulated, how can you ever be sure that the world you experience is real? At first, the question seems absurd. Of course the world is real. You feel the texture of the ground beneath your feet, hear the sounds around you, and see the vibrant colors of the sky. But pause for a moment. Everything you experience is mediated by your brain. Light hits your eyes, sound waves vibrate your eardrums, and electrical signals rush to your brain, where they're processed into the sights, sounds, and sensations you call reality. If those signals were artificially generated by a machine, a dream, or even your own imagination, how would you know the difference? The paradox digs at the heart of your relationship with reality. You assume your senses are reliable, but what if they aren't? What if your mind is the unreliable narrator of your own story, presenting a world that feels solid but is, in fact, a carefully crafted illusion? Philosophers have wrestled with this question for centuries. René Descartes famously wondered if an evil demon could be deceiving him, feeding him a false reality. His solution, "I think, therefore I am," asserted that even if everything else is uncertain, the act of doubting proves your existence. But beyond that, the question of the external world remains maddeningly elusive. In modern times, the brain in a vat scenario has taken on new relevance. With advancements in virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and neuroscience, the idea of creating immersive, fabricated experiences no longer feels like science fiction. If technology could perfectly simulate reality, would it matter whether you were living in a vat or in the real world? And that's where the paradox gets personal. If you can't prove the external world exists, what does that say about the choices you make, the relationships you build, and the life you live? Does meaning depend on reality, or can it exist even in an illusion? The paradox of the unreliable narrator forces you to confront the limits of human knowledge. You want certainty, a firm foundation on which to build your understanding of the world. But the paradox pulls that foundation out from under you, leaving you floating in a sea of doubt. Yet there's a strange kind of freedom in this uncertainty. If you can't prove whether the world is real or an illusion, then what matters most is how you choose to live within it. Even if your reality is a simulation, your experiences, your joys, your sorrows, your connections still feel real. And maybe that's enough. Think of a dream. While you're in it, the dream feels vivid and true. You laugh, cry, run, and fight as though it's all happening. When you wake, the dream dissolves, but the emotions linger. Did the dream's impermanence make it meaningless? Or was the experience itself what mattered? The paradox invites you to reframe your relationship with reality. Instead of searching for certainty, you can embrace the mystery. The world, whether real or imagined, is yours to navigate, to question, to shape. Your senses, flawed as they may be, are your tools for engaging with existence. So, can you prove the world exists outside your mind? Probably not, but maybe that's not the point. The paradox doesn't weaken the meaning of life, it deepens it. It reminds you that existence, whether grounded in reality or illusion, is still an extraordinary story being told by your unreliable, yet beautifully creative narrator. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: it's not about whether the world is real. It's about how you choose to live in it, one vivid, uncertain moment at a time. The paradox of the infinite monkey theorem. Imagine a monkey sitting in front of a typewriter, its fingers randomly striking keys. At first, the results are pure nonsense, a jumble of letters, numbers, and punctuation with no discernible meaning. But now, extend the scenario into infinity. With infinite time, this monkey would eventually produce not just a sentence, but entire works of literature. Somewhere in the chaos of randomness, the monkey would type the complete works of Shakespeare, word for word, comma for comma. It sounds absurd, but mathematically, it's true. Given infinite time, even the most improbable outcomes become inevitable. Yet this is where the paradox begins. If meaning and masterpieces can arise purely from randomness, what does that say about the value of human creativity? You might instinctively reject the idea. The works of Shakespeare weren't random. They were the product of genius, careful thought, and deep emotion. How could something so profound come from the mindless tapping of a monkey? But the theorem challenges that instinct. It forces you to confront the unsettling possibility that creativity, which feels so uniquely human, might be less about inspiration and more about probabilities playing out. The paradox also highlights the strange relationship between infinity and meaning. In an infinite universe, anything that can happen will happen. Somewhere, amidst endless randomness, beauty emerges. But if everything is possible, does anything truly matter? If Shakespeare's words could emerge from a monkey's typewriter, does that diminish their significance? Now, think about your own life. How often do you view creativity as a kind of magic, an act of summoning something extraordinary from nothing? You pour your heart into your work, believing it's a reflection of your unique self. But the theorem suggests that even randomness can produce brilliance, given enough time. Does that mean your efforts are meaningless? Or does it reveal something deeper about the nature of creation? One way to approach the paradox is to recognize the difference between possibility and intention. The monkey might eventually type Shakespeare, but it wouldn't mean to. Every letter would be a coincidence, a random stroke in an infinite sea of randomness. Human creativity, on the other hand, is intentional. When you create, you're not just producing patterns, you're shaping meaning, guided by purpose and emotion. And yet, the theorem reminds you that even intention is shaped by randomness. Your thoughts, your choices, even your identity are influenced by countless factors beyond your control: genetics, environment, chance encounters. In a way, you're not so different from the monkey, except that your randomness is filtered through the lens of consciousness. This paradox isn't just about creativity. It's about how you find value in a world where randomness and inevitability coexist? If infinite time guarantees that Shakespeare's works will appear, does that make them less remarkable, or does it make them more so? Because in the chaos of infinite possibilities, they still stand out as extraordinary. The infinite monkey theorem also forces you to reconsider your relationship with failure. If infinite randomness can eventually produce brilliance, then every misstep, every false start, every seemingly meaningless act is part of a larger process. The chaos isn't an obstacle. It's the raw material of creation. And perhaps that's the paradox's most profound lesson. It's not about proving the insignificance of human creativity. It's about revealing its resilience. Even in a universe of infinite randomness, the act of creating remains deeply meaningful. Not because it defies chaos, but because it shapes it into something purposeful. So, does the monkey's typewriter diminish the value of human creativity? Not at all. If anything, it highlights the rarity of intention in a chaotic world. Your creativity isn't random, even if it emerges from randomness. It's the process of carving meaning out of the infinite, one deliberate choice at a time. In the end, the paradox isn't about monkeys or Shakespeare or infinity. It's about you, the choices you make, the risks you take, the art you create. Randomness might offer infinite possibilities, but only you can turn those possibilities into something that matters. And that's a kind of magic no theorem can explain. The paradox of the arrow. Imagine an arrow soaring through the air, cutting a straight line toward its target. At any given instant, it occupies a single, precise position in space. Freeze time, and you see it there, motionless, caught in that one moment. Now ask yourself, if the arrow is always in one position at each instant, how does it ever move? This is the paradox of the arrow, one of Zeno's ancient puzzles, and it forces you to confront the nature of motion itself. On the surface, the idea of movement seems simple. You watch the arrow fly, its speed evident, its trajectory clear. But when you break that motion into individual instants, something strange happens. At any single point in time, the arrow isn't moving. It's just there, fixed in place. And time, as you experience it, is made up of these instants, strung together like frames of a film. So if motion requires being in a different position from one instant to the next, and every instant is still, where does motion come from? This paradox reveals a deep tension between how you perceive motion and how it behaves when broken down into its smallest parts. Movement feels continuous, fluid, undeniable. Yet when analyzed at the atomic level of time, it seems to vanish, leaving only a series of frozen snapshots. Now consider what this means for your understanding of time. If each moment is a static now, and all motion occurs between these nows, then does motion even exist as you experience it? Or is it an illusion, a story your mind creates to connect the still frames of reality? The paradox also forces you to confront the idea of infinity. Between any 2 points in time, no matter how small, there are an infinite number of moments. If the arrow must traverse all these points to reach its destination, how can it ever arrive? This isn't just a question about motion. It's a question about the structure of the universe, the fabric of time and space. At first, this puzzle seems unsolvable, but thinkers like Aristotle and, centuries later, modern mathematicians have chipped away at its mystery. They argue that motion isn't about individual instants. It's about how those instants fit together. The arrow doesn't move in a single moment. It moves through the relationship between moments. Time, like motion, isn't static, it's dynamic, a seamless flow that transcends the frozen snapshots. But the paradox goes deeper than physics or mathematics. It's a metaphor for how you experience change in your own life. Think of a goal you're working toward, a future you're trying to reach. At every moment, you're in a single position, stuck perhaps in what feels like stasis. Progress can feel invisible, like the arrow caught in an endless series of still points. And yet, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, you see the motion. You see how each tiny moment builds on the last, creating the illusion or the reality of movement. The paradox reminds you that change isn't always visible in the moment, but it's happening relentlessly, just beneath the surface. So, does the arrow move? The answer depends on how you define motion. If you focus on the individual instance, it doesn't. But if you embrace the flow of time, the way each moment connects to the next, then motion becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The paradox of the arrow isn't here to paralyze you with doubt. It's here to invite you into the mystery of motion, to see time not as a series of frozen points, but as a living, breathing continuum. And maybe that's the real lesson of the arrow. Life itself is a paradox of motion. In each instant, you are still, yet you are always moving toward your goals, through time, through change. Like the arrow, your journey is both frozen in the now and soaring through the infinite. And in that paradox lies the beauty of existence, the paradox of death's meaning. Think about death, not in the abstract, but as it applies to you. One day, your heartbeat will cease, your breath will fade, and your conscious experience will end. But here's the paradox. If death is the absence of experience, then you will never experience being dead. You'll never feel its silence, its stillness, or its finality. So, in a strange way, does death even exist for you? The paradox forces you to confront the very nature of what it means to exist. Your entire life is shaped by experience, by the things you see, feel, and think. Death, by its definition, is the absence of all of that. It's not an event you witness, but the point at which you cease to witness anything at all. How then can it hold any meaning for you if you're not there to perceive it? Consider this. From your perspective, the world began when you became conscious. Everything before that, the formation of the earth, the rise and fall of civilizations, even the lives of your ancestors, exists for you only as stories or ideas. Similarly, when you die, the world will end, at least from your point of view. You'll never know what happens next because there will be no you to know it. This paradox reveals a profound contradiction in how you think about death. On one hand, it looms as the ultimate endpoint, an inescapable certainty. On the other, it's something you can never truly experience, because the moment it arrives, you're no longer there. Death is both inevitable and unknowable, both a certainty and a non-event. Now think about how this shapes your life. Much of what you do, your goals, your fears, your ambitions, is influenced by the shadow of death. You plan for the future, fearing that time will run out. You avoid risks, hoping to prolong your existence. But if death, as the paradox suggests, is something you'll never experience, then why does it hold such power over you? Some philosophers argue that death's meaning lies not in the act itself, but in the awareness of its inevitability. Knowing that your time is finite gives urgency and significance to your choices. It forces you to live fully, to embrace the fleeting nature of existence. Death might not exist for you in the literal sense, but its presence shapes the way you live every moment. Others see the paradox as an invitation to question the nature of self. If death marks the end of you, then who or what is the you that fears it? Is it your body, your mind, your memories, or is the self just a story you tell yourself, one that dissolves when the story ends? The paradox also challenges how you think about legacy. If you won't be there to experience the future, does it matter what you leave behind? The instinct to create, to contribute, to be remembered is deeply human. But the paradox asks, is that effort for others, or is it a way to push back against the idea of your own absence? And yet, the paradox isn't just about fear or meaning, it's also about liberation. If death is the absence of experience, then it's also the absence of pain, regret, and worry. The things that trouble you in life disappear with it. This perspective doesn't erase the sadness of mortality, but it reframes it, offering a kind of peace. So, does death exist for you? The answer depends on how you define existence itself. If existence is tied to experience, then death is a boundary you'll never cross. It's not something to be feared, because it's not something you'll ever face in a conscious way. But the paradox of death's meaning goes beyond whether it exists. It invites you to see life as precious precisely because it is finite. It challenges you to let go of the fear of what comes after and instead focus on what comes now. The moments, the connections, the choices that make up your experience. Death might not exist for you, but life does, and in the end, that's where meaning truly lies. Not in the absence you'll never know, but in the presence you have right now. The paradox of the one and the many. Think about yourself for a moment. You feel like a single, unified being, a person with a name, a story, and a sense of identity that sets you apart from everything else. But is that really what you are? Beneath the surface, your body is a bustling universe of billions of cells, microorganisms, and chemical reactions. Your mind, which feels so cohesive, is a whirlwind of fleeting thoughts, shifting emotions, and subconscious processes. So, here's the paradox. Are you truly one entity, or are you many? And if you are many, where do you begin and where do you end? The paradox of the one and the many challenges your sense of individuality. On the surface, you appear whole, self-contained, and distinct from the world around you, but look closer, and the boundaries blur. Your body isn't just you. It's home to trillions of bacteria that outnumber your own cells. These microbes aren't passengers. They're integral to your survival, helping you digest food, fight disease, and even influence your mood. Even your cells aren't static. They're constantly dividing, dying, and regenerating, so much so that the physical you of a decade ago has been almost entirely replaced. If your cells have changed, are you still the same person? Now, turn to your mind. Your thoughts and feelings might feel like a cohesive stream, but they're anything but. Your consciousness arises from countless neural connections firing in your brain, each contributing to the larger experience of you. But those thoughts are fleeting, constantly shifting, shaped by external stimuli and internal chemistry. If your thoughts define you, and your thoughts are always changing, then who or what are you? The paradox becomes even more unsettling when you consider where you end and the world begins. The air you breathe, the food you eat, the sunlight on your skin. These external elements become part of you, woven into your body and energy. Are you truly separate from the world, or are you just a temporary gathering of matter, energy, and consciousness borrowed from the universe? Philosophers and scientists have grappled with this paradox for centuries. Some argue that individuality is an illusion, that you are just an emergent property of countless interconnected parts. From this perspective, your sense of self is a useful fiction, a way your brain organizes the complexity of existence into something coherent. Others hold that while you are composed of many parts, the unity of your experience is what defines you. You may be a collection of cells and thoughts, but those parts come together to create something greater, a singular, self-aware being, capable of reflection, choice, and meaning. This paradox isn't just a philosophical puzzle. It's a question that touches the core of how you live. When you think of yourself as one, you feel a sense of control, agency, and autonomy. But when you see yourself as many, you realize how interconnected and dependent you are on the world around you. Your health depends on your microbiome. Your thoughts are shaped by the people you meet and the culture you live in. Even your sense of self is a dynamic interplay between memory, emotion, and environment. And yet, there's beauty in this complexity. You are both one and many. You are a unique individual shaped by countless parts working together in harmony, but you are also a piece of something much larger, a vast network of life, energy, and existence that stretches far beyond yourself. The paradox of the one and the many invites you to embrace this duality. You are not a static, unchanging thing. You are a process, a dance of unity and multiplicity. You begin and end not at the edges of your skin, but in the relationships, connections, and exchanges that define your life. So, are you one or many? The answer is both. You are a singular being, woven from countless parts. You are the sum of your cells, your thoughts, your experiences, and your connections. And in that paradox lies the wonder of what it means to be alive. A universe within, a universe without, endlessly intertwined. The paradox of the paradox. Step into the strange world of logic, where ideas twist and turn in on themselves. A paradox is supposed to defy logic, an impossible contradiction that cannot exist within the bounds of reason. Yet paradoxes clearly do exist, like mental whirlpools pulling you into endless loops of questioning. So here's the question. If paradoxes are defined by their impossibility, but they undeniably exist, does that make paradoxes paradoxical in themselves? The paradox of the paradox is a meta-question that forces you to confront the nature of contradictions and the limits of understanding. It's like holding a mirror up to another mirror, an infinite reflection of impossibility wrapped inside itself. Paradoxes are the glitches in the system of logic, moments when the framework of reason collapses under its own weight. They arise when something breaks the rules. A statement like, "This statement is false," cannot be true or false without contradicting itself. Paradoxes thrive in this space of impossibility, but their very existence feels like a contradiction. If they're impossible, how can they exist at all? The paradox becomes even more intriguing when you consider how paradoxes function. They don't just expose logical inconsistencies, they point to deeper truths about the nature of thought, language, and reality. A paradox isn't just a problem, it's a tool, a way of revealing the boundaries of what we can know. By existing in the space between sense and nonsense, paradoxes force you to rethink your assumptions and explore new perspectives. But here's where the paradox loops back on itself. If paradoxes are tools for understanding, then they serve a purpose. They're part of the logical framework they're supposed to defy. Yet their power comes from their refusal to conform to that framework. They exist because they shouldn't exist, and in doing so, they break the rules even as they expand them. This self-referential nature makes the paradox of the paradox deeply unsettling. If a paradox is defined by its impossibility, then recognizing its existence creates a contradiction. Paradoxes shouldn't exist, yet they are some of the most intellectually stimulating concepts humanity has ever grappled with. Now consider what this means for your own life. How often do you encounter situations that seem impossible, only to realize that the impossibility itself reveals something profound? Paradoxes are not just intellectual exercises. They're reflections of the contradictions you face daily. You want freedom, but you crave structure. You seek truth, but you wrestle with uncertainty. You want to make sense of life, but life itself defies simple explanations. The paradox of the paradox reminds you that contradictions are not failures. They are opportunities. They are the cracks in the surface of understanding, the places where light gets in. Paradoxes don't need to be solved. They need to be explored, embraced, and appreciated for the depth they reveal. So, are paradoxes paradoxical? The answer depends on how you approach them. If you view them as flaws in logic, then yes, they defy their own definition. But if you see them as a fundamental part of the human experience, then their existence isn't a contradiction at all. It's a testament to the complexity of the universe and your ability to grapple with it. The paradox of the paradox invites you to let go of the need for neat answers. Paradoxes aren't problems to be fixed. They're mysteries to be lived. They remind you that the world isn't bound by simple rules and that your understanding of it is always a work in progress. In the end, paradoxes exist because they show us where the edges of reason lie, and because they urge us to peer beyond those edges into the infinite. They are impossible, and yet they are real. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most beautiful paradox of all, the grandfather paradox of time travel. Imagine stepping into a time machine, setting the dial for decades before you were born, and traveling back to meet your grandfather. Now suppose you make a fateful decision. You prevent him from meeting your grandmother. Without their union, your parent is never born, and by extension, neither are you. But here's the paradox. If you were never born, how did you exist to go back in time and change history in the first place? This is the grandfather paradox, a thought experiment that sits at the heart of time travel's most mind-bending contradictions. It forces you to grapple with the nature of causality, identity, and the very fabric of time itself. On the surface, time seems linear, a simple chain of cause and effect where the past shapes the present and the present shapes the future. But time travel upends this simplicity, creating a loop where the future influences the past. The grandfather paradox exposes the fragile logic of this loop. By changing the past, you erase the conditions that allowed you to travel back in the first place, creating an impossibility that spirals infinitely. The paradox raises a fundamental question. Can the past be changed, or is it fixed, immutable? Some theories suggest that time is like a branching tree. When you alter the past, you create a new timeline, diverging from your original one. In this version, your actions don't erase you. They create a parallel reality where events unfold differently. Your grandfather never meets your grandmother in this new branch, but your existence remains secure in the original timeline. But even this solution leaves questions. If time can branch, how many realities exist? And if new timelines are created with every choice, is there ever a true version of events? The paradox reveals not just the complexity of time travel, but the limits of human understanding when it comes to infinity and causation. Another approach to resolving the paradox is the idea of self-consistency. According to this view, the universe resists contradictions. If you go back in time, your actions were always part of history. They don't change the past, but fulfill it. In this scenario, you might meet your grandfather and interact with him, but something always prevents you from altering the key events that led to your existence. The paradox disappears because it was never possible to create a contradiction in the first place. But the grandfather paradox isn't just about time travel. It's about the nature of identity and cause. If you could change the past, would you still be you? How much of who you are is tied to the exact sequence of events that shaped your existence? By erasing your past, do you erase your essence, or is there something fundamental about you that transcends time? Now think about how this paradox plays out in your everyday life. You can't literally travel back in time, but you often revisit the past in your mind, regretting decisions, wishing you could undo mistakes, imagining how things could have been different. The grandfather paradox reminds you that changing the past, even in theory, creates ripples that affect everything else. The person you are today exists because of everything that came before, the good and the bad. This paradox also challenges you to think about the future. If your actions now shape what's to come, then every choice you make is a kind of time travel, a way of influencing the version of yourself that will one day look back. While you can't rewrite the past, you are constantly writing the future. So, can you go back in time and prevent your own birth? The paradox says no, not because time travel is impossible, but because the very act creates a contradiction that the universe cannot resolve. And yet, the grandfather paradox isn't here to close the door on possibility. It's here to remind you that causality, like time itself, is far more complex than it seems. The grandfather paradox invites you to embrace the mystery of time, to see it not as a straight line, but as a tapestry of connections, some visible, some hidden, all interwoven. Whether time travel is possible or not, the paradox leaves you with a profound truth. Your existence is the result of countless causes, a fragile and extraordinary thread in the infinite web of reality. And that, in itself, is a paradox worth contemplating, the paradox of morality. Consider the concept of right and wrong, principles that guide your decisions, shape your relationships, and define your place in the world. But here's the catch. If morality is subjective, dependent on personal beliefs and cultural norms, then is anything truly wrong? Can murder, theft or betrayal be universally condemned if morality shifts from one society to another, one era to the next? And yet, if morality is absolute, grounded in unchanging truths, why do moral codes evolve over time? Why does history show us that what was once considered virtuous can later be seen as cruel? This is the paradox of morality, a dilemma that strikes at the heart of ethics and human nature. It forces you to ask, is morality a universal truth, or is it a construct we've created to navigate the chaos of existence? If morality is subjective, then it's shaped by context. What one culture calls justice, another might see as oppression. Practices that were once accepted, like slavery or public executions, are now widely condemned, and yet they were defended as moral in their time. Does this mean morality is just a social agreement, a tool for survival that changes as societies evolve? If so, does that make morality arbitrary? But the idea of subjective morality is unsettling. If good and evil are just opinions, then what stops someone from committing heinous acts? Without a universal standard, who's to say what's right or wrong? This line of thinking suggests that morality must be absolute, rooted in something higher, divine law, natural rights, or unchanging ethical principles. Yet, the moment you declare morality absolute, the paradox deepens. If moral truths are timeless, why do they seem to shift? Why do we look back on history with moral judgment, declaring past actions wrong by today's standards? If morality were absolute, wouldn't it remain constant, untouched by the winds of culture and time? The paradox challenges you to examine not just morality itself, but the way you approach it. When you call something wrong, are you appealing to universal truths, or are you reflecting the norms of your time and place? When you strive to do good, are you aligning with an eternal standard, or are you navigating a complex web of subjective values? This paradox isn't just theoretical, it's deeply personal. Every day, you make moral choices, often without realizing the contradictions they carry. You value honesty, yet you tell white lies to spare feelings. You believe in justice, yet you forgive those you love. Your morality, like the paradox, is a balancing act between ideals and reality. And that's where the paradox offers its most profound insight. Morality isn't static, but dynamic. It's not a rigid set of rules, nor is it a meaningless free-for-all. It's a living, breathing process shaped by dialogue, experience, and reflection. Think about how your own sense of morality has changed over time. The things you once believed were unquestionably right or wrong may now feel more nuanced. This isn't a failure, it's growth. The paradox reminds you that morality is a journey, not a destination. At the same time, the paradox warns against moral relativism, the idea that all values are equally valid. While morality may be influenced by culture and context, certain principles, like the value of human dignity, seem to transcend time and place. The paradox doesn't ask you to abandon morality. It asks you to wrestle with it, to hold it up to the light and examine its contradictions. So, is morality subjective or absolute? The paradox suggests it's both, and neither. It's a blend of universal aspirations and human complexity, a mirror reflecting not just the world, but your role in it. The paradox of morality invites you to live with the tension, to question without despair, and to act with intention even when certainty eludes you. It challenges you to create meaning in a world where right and wrong are not always clear. And perhaps that's the true lesson of the paradox. Morality is less about finding definitive answers and more about the courage to ask the questions, to listen, to grow, and to act with empathy in an imperfect, ever-changing world. The Paradox of Sisyphus. Imagine Sisyphus, the tragic figure from Greek mythology, cursed by the gods to an eternity of meaningless labor. Each day, he pushes a massive boulder up a steep hill, straining against its weight, only for it to roll back down just as he nears the top, over and over, endlessly. His fate seems like the ultimate punishment, a life without progress, purpose, or escape. Now step back and ask yourself, is his struggle truly meaningless? And if it is, what does that say about your own life, which often feels like its own version of Sisyphus's hill? Is meaning something you achieve, or is it something you find in the struggle itself? This is the paradox of Sisyphus, a question that strikes at the core of existence. On the surface, it seems bleak. If life is an endless cycle of effort, repetition, and setbacks, what's the point? But within this paradox lies a powerful insight about meaning, resilience, and the human spirit. Life, like Sisyphus' task, is filled with struggle. You work toward goals, only to face new challenges. You solve one problem, only for another to appear. And ultimately, no matter what you achieve, the inevitability of time and mortality resets the cycle. It's easy to feel as though you're pushing your own boulder, trapped in a pattern that offers no lasting fulfillment. But here's where the paradox shifts. What if the meaning isn't in reaching the top of the hill, but in the act of pushing the boulder itself? French philosopher Albert Camus famously argued that Sisyphus, far from being a figure of despair, could be seen as a symbol of defiance and freedom. In his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus wrote, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." At first, this idea seems absurd. How could anyone find happiness in an endless, futile task? But Camus' point is that meaning doesn't have to come from an external goal. It can come from how you face the struggle. By embracing the absurdity of his situation, Sisyphus transforms his punishment into an act of rebellion. He may not control the boulder or the hill, but he controls his attitude toward them. In choosing to push the rock, he asserts his humanity, his will, his power to create meaning in a meaningless world. Now, think about your own life. How often do you tie your sense of purpose to outcomes, achieving success, reaching milestones, completing tasks? The paradox of Sisyphus asks you to consider a different perspective. What if the meaning of life isn't in the destination, but in the journey? What if the act of striving, of engaging fully with your struggles, is where true fulfillment lies? This isn't an easy idea to accept. Struggle is painful. Failure is frustrating. Repetition can feel like a prison. But the paradox invites you to reframe your struggles, to see them not as obstacles to happiness, but as the very fabric of existence. In every push of the boulder, there is a choice to resist, to despair, or to embrace the challenge with courage and determination. The paradox also speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. Like Sisyphus, you face tasks that seem insurmountable, moments when the weight of the world feels too heavy, and yet you keep going. You wake up each day and push the boulder, not because you're guaranteed to succeed, but because the act of trying is its own kind of triumph. At its core, the paradox of Sisyphus isn't about futility. It's about perspective. It asks you to find meaning not in escaping the cycle, but in living fully within it, to see the beauty in effort, the dignity in persistence, and the freedom in choosing how you respond to the challenges of life. So, is life an endless cycle of struggle? Yes, but does that make it meaningless? Not at all. The paradox reminds you that meaning isn't something you discover at the top of the hill. It's something you create with every step, every push, every moment you engage with the boulder. In the end, the paradox of Sisyphus is a mirror, reflecting your own capacity for resilience, creativity, and choice. It invites you to embrace the struggle, not as a curse, but as the essence of what it means to be alive. And in that embrace, you may just find the happiness that Camus imagined, waiting for you in the heart of the climb. The lottery paradox. Imagine holding a lottery ticket in your hand. You know, statistically, it's almost certain that this ticket won't win. The odds are stacked astronomically against you. But now think about every other ticket in the lottery. The same logic applies. Each one, individually, is unlikely to win. If this is true for every single ticket, then logically, none of them should win. And yet, every lottery has a winner. This is the lottery paradox, a puzzle that seems simple at first, but reveals a deep tension between probability, logic, and reality. How can you reconcile the fact that every ticket is almost guaranteed to lose, yet collectively, one ticket is almost guaranteed to win? At its heart, the paradox is about how you process uncertainty and probability. When you say, this ticket won't win, you're making a highly reasonable assumption based on the overwhelming odds. But when you extend that assumption to every ticket, the logic collapses. If no ticket wins, the entire premise of the lottery, where a winner is guaranteed, falls apart. The paradox highlights a key distinction between probability and certainty. Just because something is highly unlikely doesn't mean it's impossible. The odds may make winning feel improbable for any given ticket. But the structure of the lottery ensures that improbability will eventually converge into certainty. A winner will emerge. Now, think about how this applies to your own life. How often do you dismiss possibilities because they seem unlikely? How many opportunities do you ignore because the odds don't seem to be in your favor? The lottery paradox reminds you that improbability doesn't equal impossibility. Even when the chances are slim, the possibility remains. And sometimes that's all it takes. The paradox also forces you to confront the limits of logical reasoning. You rely on logic to make sense of the world, to guide your decisions and beliefs, but the lottery paradox shows that even the most reasonable assumptions can lead to contradictions when taken to their extremes. If you trust probability too rigidly, you risk missing the bigger picture. The improbable does happen, and often. This isn't just a mathematical puzzle. It's a reflection of the human experience. Life is full of lotteries, from the trivial to the profound. You take risks, pursue dreams, and make choices, knowing the odds are rarely in your favor. The paradox asks, should you let those odds dictate your actions, or should you embrace the uncertainty and play anyway? There's another layer to the paradox, the psychology of belief. When you hold a lottery ticket, part of you knows it won't win, but another part of you can't help imagining the possibility. That tension between logic and hope is at the heart of what makes the lottery so compelling. The lottery paradox doesn't just question probability, it questions how you balance reason with optimism, doubt with belief. So, how do you resolve the paradox? One way is to accept that probability works differently at different scales. Individually, each ticket is overwhelmingly likely to lose, but collectively, the odds shift, guaranteeing that one ticket will win. The paradox disappears when you recognize that what's true for the individual isn't always true for the group, a lesson that applies to more than just lotteries. The paradox also invites you to rethink how you approach risk and uncertainty. Instead of fixating on the improbability of success, focus on the possibility. After all, every winner in every lottery started with the same odds as everyone else. The lottery paradox reminds you that improbable outcomes are still outcomes, and sometimes they're the ones that change everything. In the end, the lottery paradox isn't just about tickets or numbers. It's about how you navigate the unpredictability of life. It challenges you to hold space for the unlikely, to question rigid assumptions, and to embrace the tension between reason and possibility. And maybe that's the real lesson of the paradox, that life itself is a lottery, a series of improbable events unfolding against impossible odds. And yet, here you are, living proof that sometimes the unlikely wins. The paradox of the infinite set. Imagine the concept of infinity, something vast, boundless, endless. It seems like infinity should be a singular, incomprehensible magnitude, stretching endlessly in every direction. But here's the paradox. Some infinities are larger than others. How can something with no end have different sizes? This is the paradox of the infinite set, a puzzle that defies intuition and stretches the limits of what you think is possible. It forces you to confront the nature of infinity itself, revealing that even within the infinite there are hierarchies and complexities you might never have imagined. To understand the paradox, consider a simple example: the set of all whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on. This set is infinite, continuing forever without stopping. Now consider the set of all even numbers, 2, 4, 6, and so on. This set is also infinite. At first glance, it seems that the set of whole numbers must be larger because it includes both odd and even numbers. But here's where infinity becomes slippery. You can match every whole number with an even number by doubling it. For every 1, there's a 2. For every 2, there's a 4, and so on. The two sets are infinite, and yet, in a sense, they are the same size. But now, imagine the set of all real numbers, numbers like 1.1, 2, or p, numbers that fill in every possible value between the whole numbers. This set, too, is infinite, yet it is larger than the set of whole numbers. Mathematician Georg Cantor proved this by showing that no matter how you try to list all the real numbers, there will always be more that aren't included in your list. This means the infinity of real numbers is a larger infinity than the infinity of whole numbers. And that's where the paradox deepens. How can infinity have sizes? Isn't infinity, by definition, endless and incomparable? The paradox of the infinite set challenges the limits of your understanding, forcing you to see that infinity isn't a single concept, but a spectrum filled with nuances and layers. This paradox doesn't just live in the realm of mathematics, it has profound implications for how you think about the world and your place within it. Consider the infinite vastness of the universe. You might feel small, insignificant in the face of such boundlessness, but the paradox reminds you that infinity itself is layered, complex, and full of variation. Your existence, like the infinities within infinities, might hold a unique place within the larger whole. The paradox also forces you to confront the limits of human intuition. Infinity doesn't behave the way finite things do. Your mind struggles to grasp the idea that two infinite sets can be the same size, or that one can be larger than another. Yet, this is a fundamental truth of the universe, a reminder that the world is far more mysterious and intricate than it first appears, and there's something profoundly beautiful about that mystery. The paradox of the infinite set invites you to embrace the unknown, to marvel at the idea that even infinity isn't simple or singular. It shows you that complexity exists even in the places where you least expect it, and that understanding the universe often means accepting its contradictions. So, are some infinities larger than others? Yes, and no. The paradox is a reminder that infinity isn't about answers, but about questions. It's about pushing the boundaries of what you think you know, about exploring concepts that defy logic and comfort. In the end, the paradox of the infinite set is less about numbers and more about perspective. It challenges you to see beyond the obvious, to question the assumptions you take for granted, and to find wonder in the complexities of existence. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all, that even in the face of the infinite, there is always more to discover, more to learn, more to understand. Infinity is not a destination. It is a journey, one that invites you to step beyond the limits of comprehension and into the endless expanse of possibility. The paradox of identity over time. Think about yourself, not just the person you are right now, but the person you were 10 years ago, or even yesterday. Your body has changed, cells have died and regenerated, scars have formed, hair has grayed or grown. Your mind has shifted too. New memories have been added, old ones have faded, your thoughts, beliefs, and emotions constantly evolving. So here's the paradox. If so much about you has changed, are you still the same person, or are you just a different being occupying the same name, the same story, the same body? This is the paradox of identity over time, a question that dives deep into the heart of what it means to be you. It forces you to confront whether identity is something fixed and enduring, or if it's just an illusion, a thread you weave from the fragments of your constantly shifting self. On the surface, you might instinctively answer that of course you're the same person. You have a name, a continuous stream of memories, and a sense of self that connects your past, present, and future. But when you look closer, that continuity begins to unravel. Think about your body. Every 7 to 10 years, almost all the cells in your body are replaced. The physical you of a decade ago is almost entirely gone. Even your brain, the supposed seat of your identity, undergoes constant rewiring as neurons form new connections and old ones weaken. If the physical material that makes up you is constantly changing, then what is it that stays the same? Now, turn to your mind. The thoughts and feelings you have today might be completely different from the ones you held just a few years ago. Perhaps you've let go of beliefs you once defended fiercely, or you've grown in ways you couldn't have imagined. If your mind is in flux, how can it anchor your identity? And yet, despite all this change, you still feel like you. How? One explanation is that your identity isn't about the physical or even the mental. It's about the continuity of your story. You're the protagonist in the narrative you tell about your life, connecting the dots between who you were, who you are, and who you hope to be. But this raises its own questions. If the story changes, does the protagonist change too? Philosophers have wrestled with this paradox for centuries. Some argue that identity is an illusion, a convenient fiction that helps you make sense of a constantly changing reality. From this perspective, there is no true you, only the current version of yourself, shaped by the circumstances of the moment. Others suggest that identity lies in patterns, not permanence. You are the sum of your tendencies, habits, and choices, a kind of living algorithm that adapts over time but maintains a recognizable core. Even if the details change, the pattern persists. But the paradox isn't just theoretical, it's deeply personal. Think about the moments in your life when you've felt most disconnected from yourself. Perhaps you've looked back on a past decision and wondered, what was I thinking? Or maybe you've gone through a period of profound transformation and felt like you'd shed an old skin, emerging as someone entirely new. Were those earlier versions of you truly you? Or were they different people wearing your face? And what about the future? Will the person you become years from now still be you? Or will they feel like a stranger living in the house you built? The paradox of identity. Over time, forces you to grapple with these questions, not to find definitive answers, but to explore the richness and complexity of being human. It invites you to see yourself not as a fixed entity, but as a work in progress, a dynamic interplay of continuity and change. So, are you still you? The answer might be both yes and no. You are the same person in the sense that you are the thread running through your own story, but you are also constantly becoming someone new. And maybe that's the beauty of this paradox. It reminds you that identity isn't a destination, but a journey. You are not a static being. You are a process, a transformation, an unfolding narrative. In the end, the paradox of identity over time asks you to embrace the fluidity of who you are, to honor your past selves, to be fully present in your current self, and to look forward to the future selves you have yet to become. Because in the ever-changing landscape of identity, the only constant is the experience of being on the journey. The paradox of the mirror. Stand in front of a mirror and look at your reflection. There you are, or at least it feels like you. The face staring back, the eyes meeting your gaze, the movements perfectly synchronized with your own. But here's the paradox. Are you truly seeing yourself, or just an image, a fleeting projection that vanishes the moment you step away? This is the paradox of the mirror, a question that challenges your understanding of identity, reality, and perception. It forces you to confront the unsettling fact that the reflection you see isn't really you. It's a reversed, intangible image, dependent on light and perspective, existing only as long as the mirror is there to catch it. When you gaze into a mirror, what do you really see? You see features, your face, your expressions, the physical outline of your body. But these are external. They don't reveal your thoughts, your emotions, or the deeper aspects of who you are. The reflection is a surface-level copy, stripped of the essence that makes you you. Now consider the fleeting nature of that reflection. It doesn't exist independently. It depends entirely on your presence and the angle of light. The moment you move, it disappears, leaving the mirror empty and silent. If something vanishes so easily, can it truly be said to exist at all? The paradox deepens when you think about how much of your sense of self is tied to that reflection. You spend your life seeing yourself through mirrors, photos, and screens, but never directly. Your face is something others see more often than you do. Your self-image is constructed from these reflections, but each one is a distortion, a reversed version, a snapshot frozen in time. Is your reflection truly you or just a shadow, a representation that you mistake for reality? This paradox isn't just about mirrors, it's about how you perceive and define yourself. Think about how often you view yourself through the eyes of others, shaping your identity based on external feedback. Like the reflection in the mirror, this external perspective can feel real, but it's incomplete. It's not you, it's an image, a projection shaped by context and perception. And yet the paradox also reveals something profound about connection. When you look in a mirror, you see a reflection of yourself, but you also see the act of looking. You see yourself seeing. In that moment, the reflection becomes more than an image. It becomes a dialogue, a meeting between you and your perception of you. The paradox of the mirror challenges you to think about the nature of reality itself. If what you see in the mirror isn't truly you, then what is? Are you your body, your mind, your experiences, or something deeper that no reflection could ever capture? It also invites you to explore the fleeting nature of existence. Like your reflection, much of what you experience is transient, dependent on light, context, and perspective. But does that make it any less real? Or does it remind you to cherish the moments of clarity and connection, however brief they may be? So, are you seeing yourself in the mirror? The answer is both yes and no. You're seeing an image, a surface-level representation that captures your appearance but not your essence. But you're also seeing the act of perception, the interplay between who you are and how you appear. And maybe that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that who you are is never fully captured by what you see. Your reflection is just one facet of a much larger, more complex self, a self that exists beyond the mirror, beyond appearances, in the fleeting, intangible space of being. The next time you look in a mirror, pause. See the reflection, but also see beyond it. Recognize the paradox, not as a problem to be solved, but as a reminder of the beautiful complexity of existence. Because in that fleeting image, you're not just seeing yourself, you're seeing the mystery of what it means to be. The paradox of the perfect life. Picture a life without struggle. Every day is effortless, every desire fulfilled, every moment bathed in comfort and joy. No failures, no heartbreaks, no obstacles, just perfection. It sounds like paradise, doesn't it? But now ask yourself, if life were truly perfect, would you even recognize happiness? Or would a life without suffering lose its meaning entirely? This is the paradox of the perfect life, a question that challenges your assumptions about what makes life worth living. It forces you to consider whether happiness can exist without its counterpart, whether meaning requires the contrast of struggle and pain to give it depth. At first, perfection seems like the ultimate goal. You work tirelessly to minimize hardship, to build a life free from suffering and full of joy. But the paradox reminds you that joy, by its very nature, is defined in opposition to difficulty. How can you appreciate light if you've never known darkness? How can you feel triumph if there's nothing to overcome? Imagine if every meal you ate was the most delicious you'd ever had, every sunset the most beautiful, every relationship flawless. At first, it might feel euphoric, but over time, that perfection would become routine. The very things that once thrilled you would lose their magic. Without struggle, Without contrast, even the extraordinary becomes ordinary. This paradox goes beyond happiness. It's about meaning. Struggle shapes you, challenges you, and forces you to grow. The moments of pain and difficulty in your life aren't just obstacles. They're the forge in which your character's formed. A life without struggle might be pleasant, but would it be meaningful? Philosophers and storytellers have wrestled with this question for centuries. The idea of a perfect existence often leads to visions of stagnation, a kind of spiritual numbness where nothing matters because everything is guaranteed. Utopia, when imagined, often reveals itself to be a gilded cage. Now, think about your own life. The moments you cherish most often come after a struggle, the job you worked hard for, the relationship you fought to save, the goal you pushed yourself to achieve. Those moments aren't perfect because they were easy. They're perfect because they were hard. But the paradox isn't just about glorifying suffering. It's not suggesting that pain is inherently good or that you should seek out hardship for its own sake. Instead, it asks you to see struggle as an integral part of life's richness, not as something to be avoided at all costs. Happiness and meaning aren't about eliminating suffering. They're about finding value in the contrast. A perfect life might shield you from pain, but it would also rob you of the resilience, growth, and perspective that come from facing life's challenges. The paradox of the perfect life also invites you to rethink your definition of happiness. True happiness isn't the absence of struggle. It's the ability to find joy and meaning despite it. It's the gratitude that comes from knowing you've overcome, the fulfillment of living authentically in a world that is messy, unpredictable, and imperfect. So, would a perfect life make you happy? The paradox suggests that it might not. Perfection, in its static, unchanging nature, lacks the dynamic interplay of highs and lows that gives life its flavor. Without the storm, you can't appreciate the calm. And maybe that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that meaning isn't found in perfection, but in the journey, in the effort, in the moments of struggle that make joy possible. Life's imperfections aren't flaws, they're features, the very things that make existence vibrant, challenging, and deeply human. The next time you find yourself wishing for a perfect life, pause. Remember that your struggles, as painful as they may be, are also what make your triumphs so sweet. Perfection might seem appealing, but it's the imperfections, the jagged edges, the challenges, the growth that make life truly worth living. Because in the end, it's not perfection that brings meaning. It's the messy, beautiful, imperfect process of being alive. And that, perhaps, is the most perfect truth of all. The paradox of the infinite mind. Imagine a mind that knows everything, every fact, every thought, every secret of the universe. A mind that can comprehend the infinite, that holds within it the entirety of existence. At first, it seems like the ultimate aspiration, the pinnacle of intelligence. But now ask yourself, if a mind could truly contain infinite knowledge, would it still be human? Or would it become something else entirely, something unrecognizable? This is the paradox of the infinite mind, a question that challenges your understanding of what it means to think, to feel, and to be human. It forces you to confront the delicate balance between knowledge and the limitations that define your humanity. As a human being, your mind is both expansive and finite. You are capable of incredible feats of understanding, creativity, and introspection. Yet, your thoughts are bounded by time, by memory, by the physical structure of your brain. These limits, while frustrating at times, are what make your experiences meaningful. You don't know everything, and because of that, you're driven to learn, to wonder, to explore. Now consider what it would mean to transcend those limits. An infinite mind wouldn't need to learn, because it would already know. It wouldn't experience curiosity, because there would be no unknowns left to uncover. The thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of solving a problem, the joy of understanding something new, all of these would vanish in the face of infinite knowledge. But the paradox goes deeper. Human thought isn't just about knowledge, it's about emotion, perspective, and individuality. Your experiences are filtered through the lens of your own mind, shaped by your memories, biases, and feelings. An infinite mind, by definition, would transcend these subjective limits. It would see all perspectives simultaneously, rendering any single viewpoint meaningless. Could such a mind even have an identity? The paradox also raises questions about purpose. As humans, you find meaning in striving, in the pursuit of knowledge, connection, and understanding. If a mind already knows everything, what is there left to strive for? Would an infinite mind, free from the struggles and uncertainties that define human life, lose the very qualities that make existence worthwhile? And yet the idea of an infinite mind is deeply compelling. It represents the ultimate freedom from ignorance, the ability to see the universe in its entirety, to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. But would that freedom come at the cost of everything that makes you human? This paradox isn't just theoretical. It's a reflection of your own aspirations and limits. Every day, you seek to expand your understanding, to push the boundaries of your knowledge. And yet, it's the very fact that you don't know everything that gives your journey meaning. The paradox of the infinite mind reminds you that limits aren't just constraints. They're the foundation of growth, creativity, and purpose. It also invites you to think about the nature of intelligence itself. Is the goal of knowledge to reach infinity, or is it to navigate the finite with wisdom and empathy? Perhaps the true power of the human mind lies not in its capacity for infinite knowledge, but in its ability to find meaning within the finite, to make sense of the small, to cherish the fleeting, to explore the unknown with wonder. So, would an infinite mind cease to be human? The paradox suggests that it might. Humanity, with all its flaws and limitations, is defined not by what it knows, but by how it learns, feels, and grows. And maybe that's the paradox's greatest insight, that the beauty of the mind lies in its imperfection, in its capacity to dream beyond its limits, even as it remains bound by them. The next time you find yourself yearning for infinite understanding, pause. Remember that it's not the destination, but the journey, the questions, the struggles, the discoveries that make your mind truly extraordinary. Because in the end, it's not infinity that defines you. It's the finite moments that shape your experience of being alive. And that is the greatest paradox of all. The paradox of the first cause? Everything around you has a cause. A tree grows because a seed was planted. A river flows because of gravity and rain. Even your very existence can be traced back to the choices, events, and processes that led to your birth. Cause and effect are the threads that weave the fabric of reality. But here's the paradox. If everything has a cause, then what caused the very first cause? And if the first cause itself had a cause, how can there truly be a beginning to anything? This is the paradox of the first cause, a question that has puzzled philosophers, theologians, and scientists for millennia. It forces you to confront the limits of understanding time, existence, and the origins of reality itself. To make sense of the world, you instinctively look for causes. A glass shatters because it was dropped. A storm rages because of changes in atmospheric pressure. Every effect has a cause, and every cause is the effect of something before it. But if you keep tracing this chain backward, beyond the Big Bang, beyond the birth of the universe, at some point you're left with a conundrum. What started it all? One possibility is that there was a first cause, an uncaused origin that set everything in motion. Philosophers and theologians often refer to this as a prime mover or uncaused cause. Some call it God, others see it as a metaphysical principle or the nature of existence itself. But this explanation feels incomplete. If everything else requires a cause, why would the first cause be exempt? Another possibility is that the chain of causes stretches infinitely into the past, with no true beginning, but infinity, while elegant in theory, creates its own problems. How can you traverse an infinite sequence of events to arrive at the present moment? Infinity doesn't provide a satisfying starting point. It just pushes the question further back. The paradox deepens when you consider time itself. The idea of cause and effect depends on time, one event leading to another in sequence. But what if time didn't exist before the universe? What if the concept of a first cause is meaningless without time to anchor it? This perspective suggests that the question might be flawed, that the very framework you use to understand reality breaks down when applied to its origins. But the paradox of the first cause isn't just about cosmology. It's about your need to find answers, to make sense of existence. You live in a world where everything seems to have an explanation, so the idea of an unanswerable question feels unsettling. The paradox invites you to grapple with the limits of human understanding, to confront the possibility that some mysteries might never be solved. And yet this mystery isn't without meaning. The paradox reminds you that existence itself is extraordinary. Whether there was a first cause, an infinite chain, or something beyond your comprehension, the fact that anything exists at all is a wonder. You don't need all the answers to marvel at the beauty and complexity of the universe. The paradox also challenges how you think about purpose. If everything has a cause, then perhaps everything has a reason, a deeper meaning woven into the fabric of reality. But if the first cause is uncaused, does that reason vanish, leaving existence as something random, something without purpose? Or does the absence of a definitive cause free you to create your own meaning, to shape your own purpose within the infinite mystery? So, was there a first cause? The paradox suggests that the question might not have a clear answer, or even a clear meaning, but that doesn't make the question any less valuable. It pushes you to explore the boundaries of thought, to question your assumptions about reality, and to embrace the unknown. And maybe that's the paradox's greatest gift. It reminds you that life's deepest questions aren't about finding definitive answers. They're about living fully within the mystery, finding wonder in the fact that you exist at all. The next time you ponder the origins of everything, let the paradox sit with you. Feel its weight, its complexity, its infinite loops, and then let it remind you of this simple, profound truth, that the question itself is a testament to the incredible, unfathomable nature of existence. Whether or not you ever find the answer, the act of asking is its own kind of miracle. The paradox of the forgotten past. Think about the memories that make you who you are. Your childhood joys, your teenage mistakes, your triumphs, and your heartbreaks. They're all woven into the fabric of your identity. But now consider this. As time passes, you forget. Faces blur, moments fade, and entire chapters of your life vanish into the fog of the forgotten. If your memories define who you are, what happens when those memories disappear? Are you slowly ceasing to be yourself, or is there something deeper that holds you together? This is the paradox of the forgotten past, a haunting question that challenges your understanding of memory, identity, and what it means to exist as a person over time. Your memories are like footprints in the sand, marking the path you've walked. They tell the story of who you are, connecting your past self to the person you've become. When you look back on your life, those memories give meaning to your present. They anchor you, giving you a sense of continuity. But memory is fragile. It erodes, shifts, and sometimes fails entirely. Imagine a moment you once thought unforgettable, perhaps a childhood summer, a pivotal decision, or a moment of pure joy. Over time, the vividness of that moment fades, the details become hazy, the emotions less sharp. Eventually, you might forget it altogether. Does losing that memory mean losing a part of yourself? The paradox deepens when you consider just how much you've already forgotten. Most of your daily experiences, even the seemingly important ones, vanish within days, weeks, or years, and yet you still feel like you. How is it possible that you remain yourself when so much of your past has been lost? One answer is that identity isn't tied to any single memory, but to the patterns and themes that emerge over time. You may forget individual moments, but the lessons, habits, and values you take from them persist. Even as memories fade, their influence lingers, shaping the person you continue to become. But this explanation raises its own questions. If your identity is based on patterns rather than specific memories, how much can those patterns change before you become someone else? If you were to forget everything about your past, every memory, every connection, would you still be you, or would you become a blank slate, a different person entirely? The paradox also forces you to confront the nature of memory itself. Is memory a perfect record of the past, or is it a story you tell yourself, a reconstruction shaped by emotions, biases, and the present moment? If memory is as fluid and unreliable as research suggests, then perhaps identity isn't about preserving the past, but about continually reinventing it. Now, think about how this paradox plays out in your life. The parts of your past you cherish most are likely the ones you've revisited again and again, retelling the story in your mind until it feels unshakable. But how many moments, how many versions of yourself have been lost because you didn't hold on to them tightly enough? This paradox isn't just about loss. It's also about resilience. You are not a static collection of memories, frozen in time. You are a dynamic, ever-changing being, capable of growing and adapting even as the past fades. Forgetting isn't necessarily erasing. It's making space for new experiences, new connections, and new versions of yourself. But the paradox also reminds you to cherish the fleeting nature of memory. The moments you hold on to are precious precisely because they are impermanent. They remind you that life is a series of transformations, not a static timeline. So, are you ceasing to be yourself as you forget your past? The paradox suggests that the answer is both yes and no. You are not the person you were 5 years ago, or even yesterday, because you've let go of parts of who you were. But you are still you in the sense that you are the one who chooses how to move forward, how to reinterpret the story of your life, how to create meaning in the face of time's relentless flow. The paradox of the forgotten past invites you to embrace both loss and change. It asks you to see memory not as the anchor of your identity, but as one thread in a larger tapestry, one that is constantly being woven, unraveled, and rewoven. In the end, the paradox isn't about clinging to the past. It's about recognizing that who you are is not just a product of what you remember, but of how you live in the present and how you imagine the future. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that identity isn't something you preserve. It's something you create, moment by fleeting moment.